History remembers the facts, but what about the phantoms that refuse to be forgotten? What if some of the most terrifying creatures in history weren't born in the wild, but born in the mind? And what if, once created, they can't be stopped? Tonight, we go deep into that rabbit hole. This is The Common Historian. Welcome back to The Common Historian, where history meets the supernatural. I'm Jeremy, and each week we explore the haunted intersections between our past and the paranormal. Tonight, I'm welcoming back one of my favorite returning guests, D.A. Wysong, international paranormal fiction author and researcher, and the force behind the Monster Hunters of America series. She's here tonight to talk about her final book in the series, Hunting the Tulpas. And trust me, this one's going places that others haven't. We're going to talk about Tulpas, Egregores, and I'm probably massacring that name, cryptids, and the terrifying idea that belief itself might be the most dangerous thing in the paranormal world. So grab your favorite beverage, dim the lights, and prepare to journey into the world where history refuses to stay buried. Welcome back, DA.
Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
No problem. And today you're all by yourself today.
I am.
I think this is the first time that we usually have someone else with us. It's a one-on-one tonight. So I'm very excited to dig right in and
I'm
go down a rabbit hole with you. You've taken the Monster Hunters of America's team through Bigfoot, Goatman, the Squonk, Dogman, and dozens of other creatures. What made you decide that the Tulpas were the right note to end the series on?
My creative process comes through titles and images. Before I ever write the books, these covers and titles were complete 3 years ago. Oh. So I really didn't know which order I was going to put them in. I thought maybe the Tulpas would be the ending because they go to Tibet. So it's outside of the country. And it's so interesting because with the first book, Rise of the Cryptids, it starts in Nazi Germany with Hitler. And as I started researching this final book, I realized that I knew that he was very interested in the occult, but he was also interested in the Tibetan monks and tulpas. Oh. So it's like a full circle for me.
That's great. That is a nice way to wrap things up.
Yes.
You've in our chats, you've said that you have went down a rabbit hole with the tulpas and the Egregores. I don't know if I say that, but now what does that actually look like for you as a researcher? Where do you go when you go down this kind of rabbit hole?
It's interesting because as a researcher, when I write, I don't know what I'm going to write about. It just comes as I'm writing. So my process is a little bit different than a lot of writers. But I have to say that by the time I was writing the fourth book, which was Hunting for Dogman in the Land Between the Lakes in Kentucky, it was through the research in there that I realized that eyewitnesses, and people that have had these encounters, as well as the legends that Dogman is with, it varies quite a bit. I think they have like anywhere from 5 to 7 variations of what Dogman looks like. And so even back then, a couple of years ago, I started thinking, what if there really is a flesh and blood Dogman or werewolf, and it is both interdimensional, or it can go in between realms. It's got supernatural powers. But what if also other people are seeing what they think it is, but it might be something that they're thinking in their mind, and that's why they look different? Because you hear some people say that it looks definitely like a wolf. Others say German shepherds. Others say coyotes. Others say otterman, if you can believe that, and so on. So I started thinking, if you have a crime that is committed and you got 5 eyewitnesses and they all see something different, that same concept. So when I started going down and researching as I wrote all these different creatures, that belief got bigger in the way I was thinking through as I was writing the stories. And that goes with Bigfoot too. So when I get down into the rabbit hole, the tulpas, it's really all about belief systems. And For me, it's like I've really had a lot of time to reflect on this as far as why do we believe what we believe? Somebody from India has diehard beliefs in their deities, their cultures, the way they do things, just as we do as Americans, and then all and so forth, all around the globe. And so when we're born into a particular area, into different religious beliefs or into different families, we have those beliefs placed on us. And then they evolve into what our belief system is. We're very much affected by what's around us. Even with legends and lores and myths and religious texts, it's all up for interpretation and all the stories evolve.
Yeah.
That really takes me back to the Tulpas, which actually originated in the Tibetan monks, the Buddhists. And most people don't realize they associate Tulpas with the Buddhist monks in Tibet, but most people don't realize why they practice creating Tulpas. And that is that it's a very high level of understanding and knowledge and esoteric wisdom to be able to develop a Tulpa, because therefore we see the way that the universe is, the creation and everything is way different than what most people see it as. Ultimately, bringing themselves to what is the question of what is reality. And if you can create a tulpa, a physical form manifesting from your thoughts, what does that say about reality?
Yeah.
And then with another step further into that is that the reason why they do this for a higher understanding is to realize that they themselves are tulpas.
Oh.
Which takes you to the next question. Can tulpas create tulpas? So once that tulpa it's like concentrated thought form, they go into very deep meditation in the Tibetan process. And once they do that, these tulpas literally separate from the body and they become in physical form. So once that happens, that's a sentient being, and it's autonomous. So it's on its own. It has its own thoughts. It actually has your thoughts from your subconscious. So it also knows your fears, your beliefs, but then it's an own separate entity. So it evolves just like we do in our own belief system. And then it's said to be believed that those tulpas in turn can create more tulpas. You don't have any control over them.
Wow, that's interesting. I haven't really looked into tulpas too much. So
Most people haven't. Most people haven't. And that's why this is such, I think, with everything that's going on in the world right now, and I believe that our human consciousness is evolving. We can't even agree as a species how we got here. We can't even agree on that. So we have this evolution of understanding of who we are. And by knowing this interacts and integrates into every phenomena in the paranormal realm. It goes as far as ghosts go, spirits, demons, angels, anything that we're looking at. Guess what else? Alien grays, reptilians, disclosures happening right now. We've all been conditioned to believe that there's these little green aliens. How do we know that's not a psyop? How do we know that those thoughts haven't been planted in us since Roswell crash? And if that is the case, that would be no longer a tulpa. That's where you go into the egregores, because that's a collective thought process that manifests those. Look at just in the last 80 years, we barely even had a drawing of a gray. Now we've got all kinds of different grays. You see how that evolution has taken place? Because the collective has fed it. We repeat the stories. We talk about it. That's what feeds these thought forms, is our energy and the way that we bring attention to it.
Very true. And I know you touched on it a little bit, but for listeners who are hearing these terms for the first time, how would you explain a tulpa versus a egregore in plain language And what's the biggest distinction between the two? I know you've touched on it, but
I think a tulp. Okay, let me tell you this. There's actually another term called a toki that a lot of people don't know of, which the mystics and esotericism, they actually label tulpas more as a religious factor, like what we talked about with the Tibetan monks.
yeah,
A Tolkien, which you don't hear that, is really more secular, because now we've got all these tulpamancers and tulpamancing, and it's all on the internet, and people are just thinking about it and creating it. And so there's a little bit different, because with religious, these Tibetan monks, they're over there dedicating their whole lives with all this energy and for growth and for different reasons why we're doing it, is
yeah,
it's on a secular level. So a tulpa or a tulki would be an individual thought form that manifests into reality. An egregore, on the other hand, like I gave just an example of the alien grays, that would be considered an egregore. But an egregore is a thought form, but it's on a collective consciousness level. There's groups of people. Most people don't probably want to hear this, but our political parties, those are forms of egregores. You're either blue, you're red, you're a libertarian. That's your belief system. So that's where you feed those beliefs, and then that particular political party it grows. Walt Disney would be, all of his stories and stuff would be different, several egregores: Superman, Batman, the Nike logo. Like when you got Nike, just go do it. You're wearing it, you're becoming it, your energy, your mentality, everything's like that. Uncle Sam would be another type of an egregore. You got this old man pointing at you. You're walking past the
yeah,
recruiting office, and normally wouldn't even think to go sign up in a list, but you got this old man pointing at you, telling you to do your patriotic duty. So therefore it's changing your thought process, and the next thing, you're enlisted, okay, for whatever reasons, because of that, what that message gave you. It's a subconscious thought. And there's a lot of people in the military. I'm not bashing the military, I'm just saying that's an example. And then there's the religious egregores. The Jesus Christ that walked the earth 2,000 years ago doesn't even look like the images that we are going by. And there's a lot of interpretations in scripture of who that man was. That's an egregore. The Jesus that we see today is an egregore. The man Christ walked, those are two different entities. You see what I'm saying?
yeah,
There's a physical Jesus, and then there's an egregore that people believe that's what this is, this and that. And this is what he looks like, and that's what he looks like. So just like with Batman, just imagine a child dressing up like Batman or a Ninja Turtle or Venom. They are becoming that. And children are really big about being able to develop imaginary friends. They believe wholeheartedly they are Spider-Man when they wear that Spider-Man outfit, or when they're playing with their Spider-Man toys. They'll put a song on and they'll jump around and they're putting their web out. Do you see the difference? He's got millions of children doing that. Guess what? Spider-Man is huge. He is powerful and he is strong, because he's one of the strongest egregores that I know,
yeah.
besides religion and politics and sports. We got people that are diehard Bengals. They wear the logo, they chant, they're a lot of people are depressed if their team doesn't win. They're putting all their energy into that. They're feeding that, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And then you've got all the logos, Coca-Cola. All those are forms of egregores. So basically collective, feeding into the collective thought, and tulpas and tokis are basically solitary.
Yeah. Now,
And I think the biggest difference, I'm sorry, with a
fine.
tulpa is that becomes a physical entity. Egregores are basically filter it through what we just talked about. So that's another difference between the two.
Yeah. Now, the egregores has roots even further back, I think, to like ancient Greece, if I remember
Yes,
correctly.
absolutely.
Traditions describing like collective thought entities, almost angelic watchers. Do you think ancient cultures were describing the same phenomenon that
Yes,
paranormal researchers are
absolutely.
chasing today?
Absolutely. And actually that's even there's a word I could not pronounce it because it is in Greek in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And the word that they use, I think it's actually in the Book of Enoch, but it's also in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And that translation is egregore, basically, exactly what we described.
Uh,
A lot of school of thought, from what I'm seeing down in the rabbit hole, is are demons, in fact, egregores, because they're being fed all these negative emotions. And that's really some food for thought to think about.
yeah, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, and because of the Greek history as well as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that actually was infiltrated into theosophy in the 20th century with Rudolf Steiner. And I'm trying to think, her name was Benzit. And she actually writes about that in a book called The Meditations on Tarot, which she was French. And she also talks about the collective and the existence of these egregores, that the demons were just basically engineered by our thoughts. So if you go into the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the way that they explain these egregores or tulpas, whatever you, because I guess it would be more like an egregore on a collective measure, but the Tibetan Book of the Dead says clearly that when we go to the other side and we die, that our concepts of what our beliefs are is basically what we face towards eternity. So if we believe in a heaven and hell, like from a Christian, that's what you're going to see. If you don't believe there's anything, there's not going to be anything. So you're basically taking your own beliefs with you to the grave. And that is what determines your eternity, that according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And then so with with theosophy, they also believe in egregores, that the demons are egregores, jinn are egregores. That's a pretty universal belief in esotericism. Actually Christian esoteric scripture, which is that the book that I'm talking about with the Meditations of the Tarot, that is a Christian esoteric book.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Alexandra David-Neel at all?
Yes, and she was a perfect example. She was a French explorer in the 1920s. She went to Tibet and she was on a mission to create a tulpa, and she did. She created this fat, jolly little, like a friar tuck kind of guy, and he laughed, and she imagined what his kind of clothes she would wear. I think it only took her 6 months of practicing what the Buddhist monks taught her, and she started seeing this little short monk on the corner of her eye in peripheral vision. And then he was laughing, and he would be sitting there right across from her. And then guess what? Lo and behold, other people were seeing him too. And then as the story goes, quickly, like I said before, tulpas have their own autonomy, so their own sentient being. And that's the way she created him. Like when we create a child, when we bring a child into the world, we influence that child, but eventually that child grows up to be whoever he wants to be. And the same thing happened with her little monk. He started getting really thin. His face started getting pretty nefarious. He started wearing a smirk instead of laughing. And it scared her, and she
Hmm.
didn't know what to do. So there is actually a meditation and a practice that you can reverse. You can reverse them. They're very hard to get rid of because they don't want to leave. But she
Yeah.
did manage to get rid of it, she said.
Yeah,
So,
I think if I remember correctly, it took her almost 6 months to get rid of it.
yeah, as long as it took to create it.
So the Slender Man is probably the most famous modern example of an intentionally created tulpa that's appeared to take on a life of its own. What does that case tell us about the line between fiction and paranormal reality?
To me, it just goes to show you how the subconscious mind believes. These girls, I believe they were only like 12 years old, and lured their classmate out into the woods and did horrible things to her. They're serving life sentences for that decision. But they wholeheartedly believe that Slender Man told them to do it. So that just goes to show you how strong, and even with all of us, but especially with children, how adaptable our subconscious is. We all go through that with media. And that's another thing with what our belief systems is. It's not just our culture, our religion, it's the internet. It's those little memes that nobody's cross-referencing and then it gets repeated. It's like an urban legend, so to speak. It was an urban legend.
Yeah.
And then, and personally, I think Slender Man is in the physical reality now. I think enough people have fed that entity, and he's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
That he's here to stay. And it's interesting because I think his name was Wade. I don't remember his last name. When he put that out there, it was for basically a contest for something awful, I think was the website. And he even had a backstory to it and everything. And as Slender Man got bigger, his backstory grew.
Yeah. It's just, it's hard to wrap your mind around it, really, that you can.
It really is.
Awesome.
And children it's funny how we use different terminology, because it's not that hard to say, oh, Tommy has an imaginary friend. So how do you know Tommy just didn't create that out of loneliness, day after day, being an only child, or not feeling misunderstood, or just whatever? And then the next thing you know, I've actually had that experience with a couple of my own kids, where they're sitting there talking to them, and you're thinking it must be a ghost, or they just got a wild imagination. But how do we know that they didn't just create that? And that's the big question for me down in the rabbit hole, is if we're not even aware that we're creating these, that means they're lingering forever, even when you're gone, even when you pass away. Which takes me to the next thing, and this is I'm trying to look and see. I got these two guys. So Walter Gibson. Are you familiar with Walter Gibson?
I've heard of him.
He wrote the series. I think it was almost 300 novellas. He writes more than me. He was writing two books a month. I write one. He was writing 2 books a month for very many years, and he lived. I think it was. Yeah, he lived up in Greenwich Village on 12 Gay Street. And he was writing these back in like the 30s and the 40s. And so it was basically, I think it was The Shadow. And I think the protagonist's name was Laminate Cranston. And his disposition was the wide brimmed hat. You really couldn't see his face. He had the long black cape. And he was basically, he wrote all these books there. And so years later, when he moved away from the house, Dr. Hans Holzer was called in to 2 guys that took over the residence and started having paranormal activity. Now, up until then, there was never no sightings, never no nothing. But guess what they were seeing? Or they were hearing things going up and down the staircase. They would see things out of the glimpse of their eyes, but in the halls, they saw a shadow man with a white brimmed hat.
Oh.
Now, Walter Gibson also met with a man. So anyway, let me finish that. So Holzer brought a medium. What's interesting is that the medium was picking up on all these attributes that were connected to the shadow. I do believe there was a couple more spirits in there that had to do with maybe back during Prohibition and stuff, because there were some things that came out that they checked and cross-referenced on that as far as the history of the house. But this is like 1970. So he closed that case out and just called it the Ghost of Gay Street. He never even knew about Gibson living there. So he was not aware. He didn't have that correlation. He just closed it out, said, yes, this is haunted. And left it at that. So about 20 years later, I think it was in 1974, or it was in the early 70s, there was a staff writer that was connected to the comic books, and he found out that Gibson was, at the time, was almost 80 years old, was going to be at this comic convention, and that he would do an interview with him. So he interviewed him, and he made a reference to the Hollister case, and he says that he called this the after image psychic projection. He believed, with everything he had, that entity was the result of him writing almost 300 books with all those escapades that it had manufactured into the physical reality. And so I think he's right. And that's my biggest question. And you, as a paranormal investigator, you interview with all kinds of people. You've probably seen a lot of things yourself. How many of these things that we're calling ghosts or demons are really just tulpas? How many?
They could be. They really could be.
Yes, and I've actually spoke with a couple psychics, mediums that are my friends, and I've asked them. One woman said that she didn't know them by that name, like a tulpa, but she said, I know what you're talking about, because like when you see a demon, there's definitely an aura or energy. They see these things. Me and you might go in and feel it, but a psychic medium can actually see it. And then with a spirit or a ghost, there's different auras for different hauntings. But she said, what you're describing is they don't have an aura because there is no soul. They were man-made, created. So the reason why I believe some hauntings can never be cleared is because we're dealing with tulpas. So just say somebody created a tulpa and they're living in this Victorian house up in New York somewhere, and for whatever reason they created it out of loneliness or sadness or greed or just whatever, or tragedy, and they pass away. So it could not only be just their spirit that lingers, but the tulpa that they created forever.
DA, with all that you write, you might create a tulpa.
Yeah. It's funny because Walter Gibson was an author. And so when you go into that, especially with me, the way my creative process is, I don't have an outline and I don't know what's going to happen. I don't even know what their names are going to be until I start writing. Of course, the monster hunters have their names.
Yeah.
And most books that I write or characters that are coming in, I don't know any of that. So in a way, I'm creating tulpas.
Yeah. Yep.
Once it gets on the TV series and they really start coming alive, I can see them really manifesting, you know? Yeah. But so I think authors really do, and creatives too, artists, people that are painting and drawing things with cartoons or Superman or the creative process would probably add an edge to that process of creating tulpas, I would say, or Tokis, what we would call secular tulpas.
Yeah. Now, you've written about creatures across the entire series: Bigfoot, Dogman, Tommy Knockers, Hellhounds. Looking back, are there any that you now actually believe are tulpas or egregores rather than physical cryptids?
I do believe that most of them are flesh and blood, and I think they're both. They're flesh and blood and interdimensional. Not interdimensional. Yeah, ultra dimensional, which I feel like they go between realms and they understand quantum physics like we don't. I do believe that, I do believe there's different forms of Bigfoot. Like if they believe the ones in the Himalayan mountains look different. I don't know, like people. There's different characteristics in Florida, like the skunk ape actually has webbed feet because I think it's adapted to that particular geography. Same thing with the Pacific Northwest and so on. But with that being said, I also do believe that some people that are, especially, it's true. So many people are seeing Bigfoot and then orbs and then alien and then ships are showing up. What does that sound like? We didn't hear that 10 years ago. We didn't hear that 20 years ago. Do you see how that's evolved? And now we think Bigfoot is connected, which he very well could be interdimensional. But I don't believe in extraterrestrials. I don't believe they're coming from another world. I
Oh,
think they're interdimensional or ultradimensional, which means they're coming in and out of realms or they're from this particular planet. And that they just, or I don't know, they're just coming in and out of maybe hollow earth or something. But I do believe some of the sightings are definitely tulpas, thought forms that are created by the spectator. Same thing with Dogman. When there's a school of belief as far as theosophy goes, which was created back in the 20th century, that elementals could be very well tulpas, thought forms that are guardians of the earth. There's so many different ones of them. But I actually always thought Bigfoot was possibly elemental. So there you have that answer. You know what I mean? I think the tree knocking and all that, they hide, they go in and out. A lot, the druids and a lot of people in esotericism believe that there's portals going in between the trees and stuff like that. But back to the aliens with the craft and Bigfoot and the orbs and all that stuff. I asked somebody this today. When is the last time that you heard somebody say they saw a flying saucer?
yeah.
What's the last time? I can't even think of the last time I've heard that.
Yeah, there hasn't been as many reports of that.
There hasn't been any, I don't think. They're all rectangular or they're morphine or you know why? Because our technology is getting better. And I'm not saying that we're not getting technology from a different species that some people would call grays or reptilians or tulpas or interdimensional beings. But I think it's very telling that we don't see flying saucers anymore because the technology is growing. Are you going to tell me an advanced race of aliens have just skyrocketed on their technology in 70 years? Because I don't think that's how it works. Our technology has increased. That's
Yeah.
what you're seeing in the skies right now. And I believe and that's another thing and you as a paranormal investigator, orbs. That was I've asked that to my readers many times and I've taken polls. When did we start associating orbs to hauntings? I don't remember even hearing about that in the 90s. Do you?
Not, no, I don't overly. No.
Do you see how that's evolved as well? George C. Scott and the Christmas Carol, Scrooge. There was never no orbs in that story, and that's really not that long ago.
Yeah.
They were all chained up. Do you hear anybody talk about chains rattling and the
Yeah.
evolution of the story, even ghost stories?
Yep. They're evolving.
Yes. And that's because our beliefs are evolving.
Yeah. Now, moving to your final book, without spoiling it, where does hunting for tulpas take the Robinson family, and what does this particular creature force them to confront that other cryptids didn't?
Imagine being a monster hunter and hunting these different creatures all this time to find out that maybe some of these were just fabricated thought forms. And if so, what are they going to do about it? How do you hunt something that is a thought? And what are you going to do with that? And how does that affect your perception of what reality is?
Yeah.
So I think it really hits the readers, the fans, myself as the author, and in general is what is reality? What is reality? If you don't, like you and I have never met in the physical, does that
Yeah.
mean we don't know one another? We know
Yeah.
one another probably a little bit better than what you've seen in the cashier in the grocery store. And that's because of the mental connection, the spiritual connection, and the internet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we know each other. We're friends. That's the reality of it, but we've never physically met. So I think with our beliefs and thinking about what really is reality.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. It's a lot to wrap your brain around.
Yes. There was another author. Were you familiar with The Invisibles from like 1994 to 2000?
I think I remember. Yeah.
I think his name was, I'm still in the process of researching. So I think he was a Scottish author by the name of Grant Morrison. And he came up with this freedom, like an archaist freedom fighter that was fighting against interdimensional parasitic, basically oppressors. His name was King Mob. So I think Grant today is 66 years old. And this was really big in between 1994 and 2000. And actually, the idea of invisible ink came from Morrison. So he really brought in his readers to connect into, it's like it was a living, it wasn't TV, but he would draw them in and engage the audience, the readers. So he ended up just made this description of King Mob, and he was the one that had all the chicks. He shaved his head, he was dressed a certain way, and Grant Morrison started dressing himself the same way and shaved his head, and he put all of his heart and soul into this character, and he would show up at comic conventions and present himself as King Mob. Well, there came a time towards the end of the series, I think it was close to 2000, when he inflicted what they called necrophagitis. And so these oppressors brainwashed King Mob and convinced them that he had basically a flesh-eating disease on his face, eating his face off.
Yeah.
And it took over his lungs and everything, and it wasn't looking so good for King Mob, okay? Guess what happened within a week of him writing that? Grant Morrison ended up in the hospital with not that flesh-eating disease on his face, but a staph infection that got on his face, and his lungs started collapsing, and they gave him 48 hours to live. 48 hours. And do you know what he did with the first 24 hours of it? He started writing a better way for King Mob. And basically, he ended up retiring. King Mob, instead of being out there with all the women, found his true love and completely changed the scenario around and ended the series. And guess what? He survived. He made it.
Wow.
It was miraculous.
That's
and that's what, like, an example of, as an author or a creative or a child or somebody that's really put in, somebody that's just so caught up in their negative emotions, even would be able to create something demonic around them, or somebody that's really violent or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that just goes to show you the power of belief, and he was very aware of what he was doing. He didn't know the degree of it until that happened to him with his health, but he ended up retiring, and they all lived off happily ever after.
Writing a tulpa as a fictional, almost cryptid, is a unique challenge. It lives in the mind. It can change forms. It can feed on attention. How do you write something like that in a way to make it feel threatening on a page?
I think the thing that's the most frightening about tulpas or egregores, just like with any monster, is that it would consume you and be able, a tulpa and an egregore would even be scary because they come from your mind. So they would know your deepest fears. So you're battling something that knows you probably better than you know yourself, because it's on a subconscious level. How many of us are aware of our subconscious thoughts? We're consciously know we don't like bridges, but that tulpa would know, to be able to take that even a little bit further, or heights, or a monster in the closet, whatever, or you just hate werewolves, or create that wolf into something unimaginable, because you got to remember, not only are they connected to your subconscious and who you are, they also have their own autonomy. So they are adding to those fears. So I think that is probably the most frightening cryptid or monster that we could ever battle as a human being.
Yeah. Some
is
of it
our
might
own
be,
self and our own minds and our own fears.
yeah. The this is the end of the Monster Hunters of America series. After all these books, all these creatures, what do you actually believe is out there?
I do believe cryptids definitely are out there. I do believe the powers that be know this. I do believe they know it. I believe that's why the national forests are cut off to the rest of us. I believe there's portals that they're very aware of, and for whatever reason, I think that there's multitudes of them in the national forest in different reclusive areas. I do believe that they're in all areas, but I believe that they are and that they are protecting that because they want us to believe a specific narrative, and they do, monsters are just make believe. Monsters don't really exist. So if we knew that, like the king of the cryptids, Bigfoot, if we knew that Bigfoot was real, if people really knew that was real, that would pretty much shake up the academia. Would shake up so many different things of where our origins as a human come from. Because, like when they like David Pilati and Melba Ketchum, Dr. Melba Ketchum, when they did the DNA of the samples that they had, she is a veterinarian and did her own analysis and took 5 years to do this thoroughly, and the scientific community completely discredited her because it did not match up to the narrative that they wanted.
Yeah.
And so I believe that they suppressed that to keep control over us, is what I think. I do believe monsters exist. The age old question, do the monsters exist because of our fear, or are we creating monsters from our fear? That's with this whole thing with tulpas, that really puts everything into a whole complete different thought. So
Yeah,
I
it
really do
really does.
believe monsters per se versus cryptids are a little bit different, but we in my series they're considered monsters, but humans are, that's what I always say. I write about monsters and sometimes they're human. So maybe the powers that be are more monstrous than the cryptids that are running around in the wild.
Yeah, very true. Now, the paranormal community tends to divide hard on the Tulpa question. Some investigators think it's a legitimate explanation for hauntings and encounters, and others think it's dangerous because it implies that investigators themselves might be creating what they find. Have you run into that tension?
I think that once this topic starts getting really out there, I've got 6 shows lined up and I'm going to be talking hot and heavy about it. And I'm hoping I get more shows even than that, as with the book being released at the end of May. I think it's a topic that's going to be picked up and we're going to be talking about it more. And anybody, and that's the whole thing about belief system. If you think you got it all figured out, you don't want to hear something else. If
Yeah.
you've been a paranormal investigator for 30 freaking years and you are dead set that there's a ghost and that ghost is fitting this description and this is what happened and that was her name, even with that, people that are open minded in that might feel like you're stepping on their toes. And then you got the religious sector, which, in the community there are a lot of Christians that are not going to want to hear this, and then you're going to have a lot of scientific people that are believe that they're coming to terms with disclosure and that these aliens are from another world, and they're not going to want to hear that these are just thought forms, tulpas. That's just a bunch of crap. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I really feel like a lot of people's feathers are going to start getting ruffled with this topic, but it's that even says more that it needs to be discussed and explored, because none of us really know what's even on the other side.
Yeah.
And then you got to remember we've got CERN opening up and changing things quantum on a quantum physics level. And I think you got the Mandela effect and all that stuff. What is that doing to our consciousness as a human? And maybe we are evolving into this higher consciousness and being able to grasp the truth that reality is not what we've always been told that it is. And the tulpas would very much play a factor in that. And as far as cryptids go, I definitely believe there's, just think about shape, just think about the wind, just think about the skinwalkers, for example. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people that don't believe that. There's a lot of people that do believe that. Guess what they got in common? Belief. And the shamans believed it. The ones that did the rituals, they
Yeah.
believed it. And the people that lived in that community culture believed it. They even eyewitnessed it. Are we going to discredit all those people in thousands of years and saying that, oh, just because we didn't see it, that didn't happen? You know what I mean? But the thing about belief is that shaman believed he was going to do this ritual and he was going to do the sacrifice, and lo and behold, he became a skinwalker. That was it, the belief of that. So belief is a powerful thing. I personally believe there are skinwalkers, wendigos, dogman, frogman, tommy knockers. There's all kinds of different elementals. And there's probably things that we can't even imagine yet, because I guess somebody hasn't concocted that one up yet. So the sky's the limit.
Yeah. Now, if an Egregore is a thought form created by collective belief, does that mean places with centuries of documented paranormal activity could be feeding something?
You want to hear an experience with that? Was one of my first books that I started writing, Ghosts of Northern Kentucky, which is all the hauntings in this particular area. And Bobby Mackey's was only 2 miles down the road from me.
Oh,
So I am an extensive researcher. Before I write, I research diligently. So there were certain stories that were attached to Bobby Mackey's, and it has a lot of history with prohibition and different hands taking over and this murder happening and that murder happening. But one of the biggest ghosts of Bobby Mackey's is Pearl Bryan. Are you familiar with that story?
yeah, I've heard.
She was found decapitated literally a mile away from me, less than a mile away. And
Wow.
it's actually where the YMCA is now, right in the heart of Fort Thomas, where all the doctors and all the aristocrats of Kentucky live. And it was said that her fiance and his friend decapitated her, and then they went down this old toll road, which was Old Alexandria, and went to Bobby Mackey's, which was at the time a slaughterhouse, which supposedly was where a lot of satanic practices took place. Okay. And there was you've heard of the famous,
Yes.
okay. And then so it runs out to the Licking River, which is on a fault line. And of course, everybody that doesn't, in case nobody knows, Bobby Mackey's was leveled a couple of years ago, but still the residual energy is very much there. But that Licking River actually runs backwards, which is a perfect thing for conducting paranormal like a conduit, I got a conduit
Conduit.
of, yeah, as well as the limestone and the water in general. So the story has it that they went down this road on Old Alexandria and went down and they did this satanic ritual, and then they put her head in the which basically went out to the Ohio, to the Licking River. First of all, I got into the archives, and there was a toll bridge that you had to pay to get down that hill. There was
Oh.
no record of them going past there. And so basically a lot of people, thousands and thousands of people over the years have seen this headless ghost. First of all, they said she's looking for her head. First of all, her body was back in Fort Thomas, which was over a mile away. And if her head was there, it's in the river now.
Yeah.
And then so I would consider that as an egregore, because it was a story that was repeated with no historical evidence that ever happened. The second one, there's another egregore that I know of, and that is the story. And Bobby Mackey himself even wrote the story about, remember Bobby Mackey's wife got pushed down those steps when she was pregnant?
Yeah.
by the daughter of the guy that owns the nightclub or the speakeasy, whatever it was. And I guess he had poisoned her fiance because she was pregnant. And he was a singer, or like he did something with entertainment. You know that story,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I'm
Okay.
familiar with it.
There was and then she killed him. She shot her father, and then she killed her. She poisoned herself. There's no historical data that says that man ever lived, that ever owned that. None.
Oh.
And no owners that ever owned that before Bobby Mackey's ever had a daughter by that name. But Bobby Mackey even wrote a song about her.
Yeah.
And his wife got pushed down by her. But there's no historical evidence that they ever lived there. It's a story that was made up. And just for the record, Bobby Mackey doesn't believe in ghosts.
Oh.
He doesn't. No. And you know what's interesting is that William Gibson, the one that had written The Shadow, that said that was a projection of basically residual energy, but he put a big fancy word to it. He didn't believe in ghosts either. He thinks they're all tulpas. He thinks all hauntings are created by tulpas. So you got all these people over thousands of years that are capable of producing these tulpas and collectively egregores floating around our universe, floating around our world, and they're just still lingering. That's really a lot to digest.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
And I am one to believe. I do believe in spiritual spirits. I believe there's ghosts. I believe that they're usually trapped, they're earthbound. I believe that demons do exist, but I also believe that some demons that we know are probably egregores.
Yeah.
And I do believe that the tulpas and the ghosts and the spirits and the demons are all hanging out together in some houses.
Oh, probably.
And remember, tulpas can create more tulpas.
True.
That's the theory anyway.
So, you've done extensive research across the entire Monsters series. How has it changed what you personally believe about the nature of paranormal encounters?
I think my beliefs evolved more, and my beliefs are stronger in the paranormal. And it's only because I wasn't really familiar with specifics on each. Like, I knew what Tommy knockers were, but I really didn't know the history on them. So I guess I have a better understanding of the paranormal. It's not that my belief is stronger. I have a better understanding of where the origins come from. And like for the Tommy knockers, for example, is a perfect example of the way that the narrative has been explained to us. Are you familiar with Tommy knockers?
Vaguely, I'm not over.
So it's basically, mine was in Colorado. So they're basically connected to the gold rush. They actually came from, I think, somewhere over in Europe, Cornish, I think, over in England. And they started with the tin mines. And then, of course, when the settlers came, their urban legends and stories and myths come with it. And then it ended up because a lot of people went out west for the gold rush.
Yeah.
So then it became these elementals that were protecting the gold, like a leprechaun. The leprechaun protecting the gold, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to know what I learned from all that research in that book? And that, with the conclusion was, that story is completely false. That story is completely compromised and corrupted, because basically, look what we as a species have done to this earth as far as iron ores and the gold, taking it just out of greed. It's not the leprechauns that are greedy. The leprechauns and the Tommy knockers, which I believe really are a thing, are the ones that are protecting. So it's that thing, I think you just posted something like that not too long ago, about the ones that win are the ones telling the history. It's a perfect example. We're the ones that are greedy. We're the ones that are raping the land, not the elementals. The elementals are trying to protect it, but we've turned them into these vicious beings.
Yeah. But
And
we, like,
that's a
you
perfect
know,
example
we were
of,
the,
yeah, that's a perfect example of the evolution and belief system that we repeat it until we believe it, and then we tell it to our children. And the next thing you know, got this leprechaun running around, and he's a serial killer on the TV.
but we, in the end, we were the winners, if we were winners, if we want to say. And so we wrote the story the way.
Exactly. But it's so far from the truth. We do it all in the name of civilization and development. And what they're trying to do is just keep in the earth what we are. And I love crystals. I think everybody does. But if you knew to the degree of greed that these people that are setting up rock shows are doing to go and take these huge, magnificent pieces of crystal out just so we can have a crystal sitting on our desk, it's really shameful. It really is.
Yeah. Oh, it is.
And the same thing with gold or iron or oil. And the list goes on.
So I have just a couple more questions for you because we are coming up upon the hour mark. Hunting for Tulpas releases on May 31st. Where can people find it? And is there anything else in the pipeline after the series
Oh
closes?
yes. You can find all my books on Amazon, and there are some in the local bookstores, Joseph, and on expanded distribution, and they are found in some libraries depending on the area that you're in. And as far as my projects coming up, I have quite a bit. I'm going to be actually starting in the summer. I'm going to take a little bit of a breather for about a month. And then probably midsummer, I'm going to start working on my first paranormal romance called
Oh,
Darkness Brewing. It's going to be something really different. I am going to be collaborating with friend and author John Vandeventer on a book called The Gin. And I'm going to be doing my first collaboration, which I'm super excited about. And in case people that don't know, John is the author of this Relics series as well as Nephel. We have different perspectives on what Bigfoot is and what the paranormal is. He comes from a Christian perspective, whereas mine is more esoteric. And it was actually his idea for us to collaborate because he loves that we can bounce our ideas off. We listen to one another and we grow through that. And I wish more people could do that. But that particular book is going to be stationed over in Iran, which I'm super excited because John has military. He was in the military for over 20 years, and he originally was a technical writer. So I'm super excited to be able to learn and grow in my craft. Now, his ideas are going to be a little bit different than mine. I am going to be focusing with my character. We're each going to have a character, two protagonists. Mine's female, his is male. It's going to be, they're called into Iran to investigate whatever. And these jinn people are seeing them. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they're basically Islamic demons. Yeah.
I've heard stories.
Yeah. So I'm going to use in my part of the story, I'm going to be focusing on the stargates. I do believe that's one reason why we are over there right now. I believe that's why the Iranian war began back in 2003, I think it was. And I do believe that they're trying to suppress the people, the humans, to understand that there are stargates all throughout the world. I think there's 12 of them, and I think that particular stargate's number 10. So if we did have that technology or that understanding, we could definitely go in between worlds, realms, dimensions. So that's going to be the other one. And then I've actually got a couple more books after that. One's called Soul Snatchers, which is going to be about the reptilian agenda, which is probably going to be one of the most frightening things I've ever written. And my friend James Bartley, which is with the Cosmic Switchboard. I don't know if you're familiar. You should definitely go check his YouTube channel
I'll have
out.
to check that out.
He is an expertise in reptilians. He's going to write my foreword for me, and he's actually working on that right now. That'll probably be coming out towards the end of 2027 after the Darkness Brewing and the Gin. So I do, and I have more after that. I really,
Wow.
it's like these ideas just come to me, and I've got all the covers and the title. I just have to have time to be able to get to it to write it.
Yeah. And for everyone out there, if you want to, I know DA had mentioned Bigfoot and John and her's differences on the opinion on that. I will put we did an episode previously, and I'll put the link to that episode in the description
Yeah,
in case you guys
John
would like
has a
to check
really
that
interesting
out.
take on that. Yeah, he believes that the Bigfoot are the Nephilim, spirits of the Nephilim.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so I remember that was quite
Mhm.
the show we had on,
Mm,
because you guys differed quite a bit
yeah,
on your
but
belief
we
in.
appreciate each other's differences.
One last question before we wrap up. You've been a tremendous part of the channel and the conversations we're building here. The last question I have is for someone who has never read a single Monster Hunters of America book. Which one do you hand to them first, and why?
I would go with the first book, and actually after that, the second book. The first book being Rise of the Cryptids, and the second one being Unleashed, because they go hand in hand so closely. And I didn't know that it was going to start out the way that it did, but it basically starts out in 1938 in Nazi Germany. So that is the origins of, this is really cool. That is the origins of Monster Hunters of America. So it's the Monster Hunters today. It's their grandmother, Deanna Robertson. And she is commissioned by not Hitler himself. And she finds out about some pretty diabolical experimentation, which everybody knows that kind of thing was going on with the Holocaust anyway. But I take it to another level and include hybridization of cryptids and working with alien technology. And then in the second book, in Unleashed, when she arrives into America, she's commissioned by the OSI, which is the original CIA. It's before the CIA came in, and the war was still going on, and she flees to America. It's like an X-Files kind of branch of the government, the CIA. And I think Roswell was her first case. What's so interesting is everything that's been coming out in the Epstein files, everything that's been coming out with this disclosure that's pending is all found in the second book, Unleashed. I can't make
Oh,
this stuff up. It's
wow.
yeah, it's
Mm,
just a confirmation that I'm on the right track of the truth, that I really want people to know the truth about history.
it's amazing. Yeah. I thank you for coming on, and I hope that as more projects come out, we can connect again and chat some more.
Right.
And so, for everyone, until our paths cross again in the realms where history and mystery collide, stay curious, stay brave. If tonight's conversation had you question what's real and what's created, you're not alone. Drop a comment below with your take on what tulpas are, and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Links to DA's books are in the description below, and I will see you on Wednesday.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you. Bye bye.